Molweni. Goeienaand. I can hear people are very cold. Program Director, Professor Sean Pather, our guest of honor, the Ambassador of EU to South Africa, Dr. Marcus Cornaro, and the former Ambassador of South Africa to the World Trade Organization, Dr. Faizel Ismail. It is indeed a rarity and an absolute honor to welcome you to the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. On behalf of the Vice-Chancellor and the entire executive management and staff. CPUT is a relatively young institution. We were born in 2005 and has to constantly evaluate its offering, its research and innovation, its engagement with stakeholders in the light of emerging needs. Current trends indicate a renegotiation of the actual social contract between science and society that sees society as an active partner in the creation of socially robust as opposed to reliable knowledge. Our role, therefore, is key and critical in regional economic development, and thus our stakeholder engagement strategy and research uptake strategy will come handy. In 2010, the Cape Peninsula University of Technology adopted an overarching 10-year academic plan. It is aptly named Vision 2020 and seek, among others, to strengthen research and foreground innovation and best practice across the institution. It is in this transition from a good to a great University of Technology that CPUT will generate relevant research and innovation, which is aligned to the needs of the province, the country, the continent, and the world through knowledge discovery, excellence in teaching and service. The university currently has more than 33,000 students, and it is our intention to attain a cohort of postgraduate students, which is at least 7% of the total enrollment across the institution. The CPUT Cape Town Public Lecture here tonight is a contribution to the goals of engagement and cultural change towards an enduring academic culture, of creating futures, implementing the research technology innovation blueprint, of moving CPUT from good to great. I know that colleagues like that, from Collins, and from great to great from Lina Kaplan, and Thala, and Robin Kofal. And thus creating the best university by far. I will be remiss if I don't acknowledge our partners, the Cape Times, and Mr. Aziz Hartley, who are keen to take us from ordinary to extraordinary. We also have in our midst our friends from the University of Massachusetts, I suppose. They're supposed to be here, as well as our research chair from University of Florida, Professor Norman Fitzcoy. Tonight, in this CPUT Cape Town lecture series, we are in for a conversation entitled Global Challenges, Global Partnerships, South Africa and the European Union at Work, Harnessing University Cooperation to Address Key Challenges. Program Director, our association with EU goes a long way for obvious strategic reasons. Some years ago, the European Union delegation to South Africa, under the leadership of Roland van der Geer, hosted a number of EU firsts at CPUT. We are happy that his successor, Dr. Marcus Cornaro, is continuing with that legacy of engaging higher education institutions. Some of the issues that were discussed and benefited us are the following. We have seen greater participation of Cape Peninsula University of Technology in Erasmus Mundus action, where we have built major capacity in research and innovation. We have seen greater participation in framework programs, both FP6 and FP7. And of course, we have seen better understanding of the Horizon 2020, or Vision 2020 for Europe. One of the stories that were topical in the recent past is the South Africa-EU citrus trade. And we know that South Africa is actually exporting about 600,000 tons of citrus, and many of them are coming from the Western Cape. And it seems that that challenge is now behind us. There were stories of possible banning and alleged protectionism as a driver of EU action regarding pathogen CBS, that is citrus black spot contamination. The EU and South Africa have agreed to resolve their scientific dispute over fruit-to-plant fungal growth called citrus black spot contamination through International Plant Protection Convention. CBS significantly lowers the retail value of the affected produce. South Africa contends at the time that there is no scientific evidence of such contamination. As a higher education institution and drivers of research and innovation, we are more interested in the impact and empirical evidence of the Mediterranean and non-Mediterranean climate that cause this CBS, more so on post-harvest and agri-processing. We are also aware of the trade performances between SA and EU has been affected by the global economic crisis, but we hope the solution be found. Program Director, in parting, let's hope that Britain will remain within EU for socio-economic and political reasons come Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, you are actually most welcome. Please sit down and enjoy the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nhlapo, for your warm words of welcome and for framing this evening's public lecture so eloquently. And I'm sure, Dr. Cornaro, that there are some few pointers in that opening address in terms of what needs to be covered. Ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Nhlapo has already indicated, the public lecture series has been conceived as a partnership with the Cape Times. It's part of our own growth trajectory to be an engaged university. It's part of our own mission to deal with everyday issues, to deal with things that with common purpose to inform the academic debate, to inform research, to inform who CPUT is. And partnerships are a very important part of this journey, and I therefore have great pleasure to call upon Mr. Aziz Hartley, the Deputy Editor of the Cape Times, with whom we are jointly hosting this public lecture. Thank you very much.
Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Deputy Vice-Chancellor, I'm going to try and do better than you. Assalamu alaikum. Dumelang. Evening. Goeienaand. Muda grazie. I've tried. Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm going to be brief. Just want to say evening to all of you here, and particular welcome to our guests, Dr. Marcus Cornaro and Dr. Faizel Ismail. As Cape Town's best morning read the Cape Towns are quite pleased to be in collaboration with the CPUT in this lecture series. And we want to again thank the Vice-Chancellor for having initiated this event. And he and his colleagues, and it's an initiative that we bought into immediately. We didn't hesitate to say yes when this partnership was raised with us. We view these events as part of, encouraging debate and dialogue on important issues that's, for all of us to think and ponder as we exchange ideas and as we continue to build our democracy in South Africa. And as a newspaper, we regard our role as that of contributing to the betterment of our society. And in this regard, that we have deep respect for the role and the contribution that this university is making, and having made by creating this type of event. This lecture series, we think, is part of that contribution. And it's actually a challenge that we would like other institutions of higher learning to take up, because we need more of these kind of debates. We need more of these kind of discussions. We need more voices to come out. And we are actually challenging other institutions to follow CPUT's example. As we know, South Africa is a country of great opportunity. But we're also a country with many challenges. And, one of those challenges is that of improving our economy, making sure that we're on a solid basis, because the needs out there are very great. And we have people out there that look up to us to make sure that the future of them and their children and their grandchildren are secured. We want to thank the participants in tonight's event for adding value to the debate and dialogue on the challenges that face us as a nation, and also the challenges that face us as a global nation. And as we stated previously, we regard these events as part of the discourse in our country. And they are part of, in line with our ethos at the Cape Times, and part of our ethos is to be a voice for all. We want to hear all voices out there. And we also want to hear the voices, even those we don't like, because we subscribe to the principle that says we may not like what you say, but we will certainly fight for your right to say it. So in that way, I want to say thank you, and once again, good luck with the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Mr. Hartley for those words and for further framing what this public lecture series is about. Ladies and gentlemen, as we all know, the EU itself plays an important role in South African international relations. In an opinion piece on the presidency's website, the state president wrote in 2015, in terms of South Africa and the EU, that he says, and I quote, "We are convinced that our strategic partnership with the EU is not a relationship of convenience or expediency, but one that is based on principle and shared values, inspired by a common vision for a peaceful and better world in which all enjoy human dignity. Our relationship with the EU is like Beethoven's legendary Ninth Symphony. It will endure forever. It is an essential element in the tapestry of our foreign policy." Ladies and gentlemen, with that backdrop into framing international relations view from South Africa's presidency in terms of the relationship with the EU, it really gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Marcus Cornaro, who is the European Union Ambassador to the Republic of South Africa. Dr. Cornaro has been in South Africa since October 2015 as head of delegation of the European Union's diplomatic mission to South Africa. Previously, he was Deputy Director General in the European Commission's Directorate for Development Cooperation, which was a post he held from 2012. Dr. Cornaro oversaw all EU-funded development activities for partner countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. He held the position of the European Commission's co-chair of the EU-South Africa Joint Cooperation Council. Dr. Cornaro holds various qualifications, including a doctorate in law and a master's in international development from the American University in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me and put your hands together and let's give Dr. Cornaro a very warm welcome.
Thanks a lot indeed for this very, very warm welcome and this impressive staging of a debate, indeed a public debate, which I was looking forward ever since we had in February here hosted by the university, the European Study Fair, bringing I think 80-some European authors here to the hall, about 1,000 visitors, and undermining to what extent, indeed, as the panelists already said, we have potential for an exchange, an enormous potential also to put our collective thoughts together. And it's really against sort of that backdrop that I'm here tonight. Dr. Lapo, this came as a follow-up to the very good conversation we had at the time that I said I would be happy to come back any moment to share some broader thoughts on where we do stand indeed on a European Union-South African relationship, and the fact that sort of after my presentation we can engage in a longer conversation also with Dr. Faizel, coming back from his wealth of experience also on international trade matters, is an excellent format to do so. Maybe I'm just left to add a few other European languages to the good evenings, the salam alaikums, the moloenis, and the guten abend I've already heard. So buonasera, bonsoir à tous les autres amis européens et des europophiles. Anyway, with all that, really thrilled to be here tonight and to be engaged on the topic of global challenges, global partnership, South Africa and the European Union at work. And at work is really what I think we should emphasize on as we see how things are going. But nonetheless, let me take you back 20 years ago when Nelson Mandela, he traveled to Europe, and just a few months after he had signed the country's new constitution. As all of you know, Madiba was not afraid to speak his mind. And as he began his speech in Oxford, famous speech, he recalled 5 centuries of disagreement, 5 centuries of misunderstandings between our 2 continents. But then he went further, and I quote, he said, "I come to Europe," he added, "to pose the question whether our generation has the capacity to close the circle on these 5 centuries. And also Madiba never got stuck on the rancor of the past as he laid down his vision for the future. And here is what his vision sounded like. And I quote again, "Never again shall continents, countries, or communities be reduced to the smoking battlefields of contending forces, of nationality, of religion, race, or language." His vision was a new world order based on mutual respect, partnership, and equity. Now, 20 years on the work towards such a new global order has only just started. We are finally realizing that most of today's challenges are global challenges. We are finally realizing we can only tackle them together and tackle them in partnership. And we have also learned that unilateral intervention often creates more problems than it solves. Little by little, we have started working on something new. Think of the deal we reached with Iran. Diplomacy can so much more than weapons. Think of the Paris Conference on climate change or the Sustainable Development Goals. We have shown the world that we must move beyond an era of blocks, north against south, east against west. South Africa understands this very well. South Africa looks at the world from a privileged point of view, I would say. It's an industrialized country in the southern hemisphere. It's a member of both the Group of 20 and the G77. It is not by chance that South Africa's chairmanship of the G77 plus China group was absolutely crucial for the success of both the COP21 and the SDG conference in New York. These are the hints that a different global order, the one based on mutual respect, partnership, and equity, is indeed possible. Our world has changed so much since the end of the Cold War. It is a world of rising forces and medium-sized powers. And in such world, all pathways towards a more cooperative and multilateral setting should be explored. Countries like South Africa are key in building bridges between various groups and organizations. Different challenges might call for different formats, and in a more cooperative world order, alliances cannot be mutually exclusive. It makes perfect sense for a country like South Africa to diversify its partners around the world. Europe fully supports this, but at the same time, diversification should not exclude that old-time friendships keep getting deeper. South Africa is one of the 10 strategic partners for the European Union. And yet, there are so many fields where our cooperation can fortify. A wider and deeper network of partnerships and of regional alliances can only facilitate our work for peace worldwide. And this brings me to the European Union and South Africa. Since the day that Nelson Mandela walked as a free man in 1990, Europe and South Africa have seen rapidly increased cooperation. First 2 decades very much concentrated on Europe, making its presence and its support felt with substantive development cooperation, and then moving on, combining trade, development, and politics into establishing in 2007 what is called the Strategic Partnership, which is a forward-looking platform that facilitates the wide-ranging cooperation between the European Union and South Africa. Under that, there is a variety of dialogues between the European Union and South Africa, which allow us to share experience in areas of common interest or where we face common challenges. Areas covered by these dialogues include education, health, energy, the environment, macroeconomic policies, human rights, and peace and security, including maritime security. Our partnership is broad, it's comprehensive, and it covers political, trade, and developmental interests. Let me pick up politics and security first and move then on to a few of the other areas. On politics and security in the continent, Europe is very keen to strengthen the cooperation between Europe and South Africa, notably in the context of African Union security issues. South Africa is playing a key role in the African Union's and in the United Nations peacekeeping efforts. Your country is contributing to the stability, for instance, of the Great Lakes and of the Eastern Congo, including with your troops in the UN Force Intervention Brigade. President Zuma has recently been part of an AU high-level delegation to Burundi, which is working together with the UN and the European Union to try and find a solution to the crisis. It is vital that South Africa keeps following the example set by Nelson Mandela, who facilitated, for Burundi that is, the Arusha agreements and had peace in Africa as a top priority. This is a value we share, and it is also an interest we share. A more peaceful Africa would provide European firms with a better environment for investments. It would help us to better manage human mobility and mass migrations. In fact, we have all understood how strong is the link between stability and development. In today's world, whenever we talk of a new global order based on respect, partnership, and equity, we must also talk economic growth. The European Union and South Africa also share human rights values. In this 2016 African Year of Human Rights, just to put a pointer on that particular subject, South Africa proudly champions the rights enshrined in the African Charter and chairs the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And it's good to underline that this is not just a Western agenda, it's an agenda we share, and as I say, fully enshrined in the African Charter and the African Commission on Human Rights. With that, let me move on to trade and investment and the broader economic chapter. Because when we talk economic growth, the words investment, trade, and fair opportunities are at the core of our relationship. In recent years, the relationship between Europe and Africa was mostly based on a donor-recipient mentality. But here in South Africa, it is clear that this is not enough in today's world. Europe needs strong partners. Europe needs a strong Africa, and Europe's interest is to invest in Africa's growth. The experience of the European Union with South Africa under the Trade Development Cooperation Agreement is quite indicative. That's the agreement signed in 2004, is quite indicative already as to what a balanced trade and investment relationship can deliver. I will not run you through the details of figures here, but the overall track record is impressive. And if I were only to single out 2015 as a litmus test as to how the current trade and investment relations do work, I'm very pleased to say that we had almost about a 10% growth of South Africa-Europe trade and vice versa, and a growth in trade which was also beneficial in relative proportion more to South Africa than the inverse, hence already starting to narrow the trade deficit. And this in a year when South Africa's trade with other partners, notably China, plummeted. It is also, I think, interesting to note that out of the total foreign direct investment, and I'm sure you have seen the figures, about 3/4 of that still emanate from Europe, and that altogether there's about 2,000 European invested companies in South Africa, accounting directly to about 350,000 some jobs. And they've all developed strong networks of local supply, which sustain further indirect jobs. And citrus was mentioned as one of the many sectors, but indeed the 600,000 some tons produced and shipped to Europe annually account for about 100,000 seasonal workers. So already on that dimension, we can measure the importance of EU-South Africa trade. But citrus is interesting, I think, for its aggregate dimension and workforce, but it's not as indicative as many other of the products which South Africa manages to sell to Europe. Most of them in the manufacturing sector, most of them with a value-added chain, which is considerably. And this is something where we do anticipate that the Economic Partnership Agreement, this is sort of the new catchword, signed in Botswana last week, that this Economic Partnership Agreement will amplify these opportunities not to be missed. It is an agreement which allows for South Africa, notably, a greatly improved access on agricultural products to Europe. But it is also an agreement which is coined and framed in a way that it would actually reinforce and encourage, rather than hinder, regional integration by a number of mechanisms which actually encourage, rather than impede, regional accumulation. And that is not just with the SACU member countries, but also Mozambique. But it's also with other countries which have similar economic partnership agreements with Europe, not just Zimbabwe, but the Eastern African Union, and also countries in the ECOWAS region. And that is the broad spectrum under which we like to look at Southern Africa from Europe, and also where, more broadly speaking, this is the type of language picked up by the last EU-Africa summit held in Brussels in 2014, where leaders engaged to develop even further an open, transparent, and predictable investment climate, including through improved legal frameworks. And again, EPA has the big advantage that this is not a unilateral concession coming from Europe. It's a mutually binding agreement which will put the value of trade and investment relations between Europe and South Africa into a very predictable pattern. Alongside legal agreements, there's also quite a bit of what we have been doing and what we can still do to promote further private sector-led trade and responsible investment. Quite a few things we can do to support small, micro, and medium-sized enterprises. all of which play a strategic role in wealth and job creation in both economies, that is both South Africa and in Europe. What I just would like to sort of anchor here as one of the discussions we have with South Africa, of course, is that all of that also requires a sense of trust in the predictability of policymaking also within South Africa. And we need to flag occasionally back to government that current business surveys and other sources show an increasing level of apprehension with regards to some of the policy inconsistencies and impact. We can pick up some of them in the conversation later on, be it around the Private Security Industry Regulation Act, some of the bilateral investment treaties, and others. But by and large, I would like to say that with the response we get from many of the government partners, with the leverage we do see with the European Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also now undermined by the stronger bilateral economic partnership agreement, that the medium-term and longer-term intentions and commitments of the European sort of invested business here is certainly here to stay, and certainly here to continue to help transform the country. With that, and the catchword of transformation, a few words on development assistance. Evidently, South Africa being an upper middle income country, there is actually little scope to argue for a continued increase of massive grant-funded development programs. But nonetheless, for South Africa, at South African government's request, we have made an exception as compared to, say, Brazil or India or other countries where we entirely phased out a bilateral program and have still kept quite a reasonable envelope together, in aggregate figures, 250 million of grant euros for the next 5 years, allowing us for about 50 million euro per year to frame programs with government. And with a focus on education, focus on employment, and a focus on enhancing the state's capacity to provide its citizens with services. And in all three of those elements also a strong outreach to civil society. In all three of these elements, a strong reference to the National Development Plan Vision 2030, which we still like to support and appreciate also the government's continued commitment to focus on that. Within that, from education, let me now zoom into what is at stake for university cooperation, maybe a bit more in detail, where Europe remains committed to helping South Africa to create better opportunities, notably for the youth. And this means that everyone should have a fair chance beyond the social background, religion, and the color of skin. It means improving access to high-level education and favoring entrepreneurship, especially among youngsters and women. This is the core idea behind the Erasmus Plus program. Many of you would maybe even have participated already, for which we have about 600 million rand for South African mobility for the next 5 years to come. And this is to assist in the further development of higher education, where we notably combine the support to individual mobility with capacity building between institutions. Figures are quite impressive. About 800 South African graduate students and academics have recently participated in previous known programs, and currently we have about 1 mobility per day for a South African to come to Europe, and with a correlated support receiving then from the European University also to give support and cooperate with the sending institution. But our support also goes beyond the individual mobility student. I was glad that you mentioned already to what extent the Cape Peninsula University of Technology is actually at the forefront of making use of these various facilities. We have counted at least 60-some beneficiaries over the last years. I don't know if anyone is in the audience. Would be interesting to know. And also that in addition to the mobility, about 3 out of 4 projects which we managed to frame under the Erasmus area in innovation and entrepreneurship is involving the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. But our cooperation on education also includes a support program with the Department of Higher Education and Training. That is notably the Teaching and Learning Development Program, where we operate through a collaborative approach with universities in teacher education programs. And this from early childhood development up to academics. Our engagement in education and higher education is also in particular not limited just to funding, but also an important element of our periodic dialogues, where we share lessons and practices on policy development and implementation. We also, maybe also as a topic for discussion later on, trying to develop a skills development program with the Teaching and Learning Development Department. And all of that to put sort of our efforts into the broader challenges of employability in South Africa, where I would like to see ourselves understood, I believe, as I think South Africa's most predictable, most reliable, and most committed international partner to help overcome the serious challenges on finding employment for youth, as I say, with the broader aspect of what it takes to develop proper skills, from life skills to vocational training, and what it takes also then to turn these into job opportunities, be it with the work we're doing on small and medium enterprises, access to finance, the parenting, incubating of different companies, linking that also to the broader exchange we can have at the level of higher education, linking that to innovation and job opportunities. And linking that also to what I do believe is in terms of corporate social responsibility of many of the European companies invested in Europe, something we can still tease out more commitment and bring this even into closer contact and connection of what the government, be it at national or be it at provincial level, is trying to achieve. And with that, I'm already trying sort of to come to a few concluding points so that we can have an interaction here with the audience and Dr. Faizel. It's just to say that I hope the landscape I was portraying shows that Europe and South Africa are partners in many fields and will have to be partners in many fields. There is much work to do both in South Africa and in the European Union. This year South Africa celebrates 20 years of constitutions, which has developed an impressive democracy. What I think is yet the challenge previous speakers referred to is also make sure this democracy delivers on social services and overall transformation. Again, at the heart of a lot of that is jobs need to be created, but not just in South Africa, similarly also in Europe. And growth will need to be increased both in Europe and South Africa. Europe and South Africa, in all of that, have an interest to be seen standing shoulder to shoulder, a partnership which is designed for us. When someone in Europe these days says we cannot cope with the current refugee crisis, I always reply, I mean, look at those countries who have been hosting millions of migrants for many, many years. And South Africa is one of those. Migrants make up about 10% of the country's population. This is just one example as to how we can help each other make this phenomenon sustainable. And we can work together for the stabilization and the growth of the whole sub-Saharan Africa, where many of the current flows do originate. As we debate this here this evening, it's also sadly necessary to acknowledge that also in Europe we're witnessing very tough debates, and also we are facing a worrying rise of racism and xenophobia. And this is not just linked to a refugee crisis. It is also linked that as inequalities and insecurity spreads, this is something which does come to the fore and something we do need to address. And again, this is a challenge we do share. South Africa, in this context, again, has much to teach us about peaceful coexistence and reconciliation. 20 years after the Constitution was signed, those words are still a beacon for the entire world, that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. United in diversity, this is exactly the same motto of our European Union. And making these words come true is our common challenge, the task ahead, and the deepest reason for our relationship. It's a great privilege to live and work in this beautiful country, in this fascinating period of its history, and to make of this my task ahead. With that, I thank you very much, and I look forward to questions, answers, and the discussion with Dr. Faizel. Thank you very much.
Dr. Cornaro, thank you very much indeed for that input. I'm tempted to already start responding, but I shall not usurp Dr. Ismail's role this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, just to say that we are indeed very fortunate to have also been able to get Dr. Ismail as a respondent, and given his background, and I will give you a short sketch just now, it's an ideal complement to Dr. Cornaro's role here in South Africa as the ambassador, the EU ambassador. Dr. Ismail is currently an advisor and consultant to the DTI on international trade and a special envoy on the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. He is currently the chairperson of the International Trade and Administration Commission, ITAC, and he is also an adjunct professor at the UCT School of Economics. He has served as ambassador, permanent representative of South Africa to the WTO from 2010 to 2014, and prior to this, he was the Deputy Director General for International Trade and Economic Development in the Department of Trade and Industry. And as South Africa's chief trade negotiator since 1994, he had led the new democratic South Africa, excuse me, he had led the new democratic South Africa's trade negotiations with the EU, SADC, South African Customs Union, and several other bilateral trading partners. Dr. Ismail has several qualifications, including PhD and an MPhil from the UK, and a BA from the UKZN in Pietermaritzburg. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call upon Dr. Ismail now, and he may choose to speak from his seat or come here. But his brief is to, in the first instance, frame a response to Dr. Cornaro's lecture. And as this is an evening in which we want to deal with relevant issues, provoke debate, I'd like to ask Dr. Ismail to feel free to unpack the lecture in whichever way he'd like to cut it based on his wealth of experience. And thereafter, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask you all to make notes, as you've obviously been doing, and based then on that response, we will continue the dialogue between yourselves and our esteemed guests here. So over to you, Dr. Ismail.
Thank you very much, Professor Sean Pather. It's a great pleasure, really, for me to be here at CPUT. I am now a retired trade diplomat and a local resident of Cape Town. So it's a great pleasure. I spent a few years here in the period 1992 to 94 at the University of the Western Cape during the time of the amazing Jakes Gerwel, who was then rector at the university, and when a great many exiles from around the world found a home at UWC. I, of course, wasn't in exile at all, but I had just returned from the University of Sussex, where I had spent 2 years, and that's how I got involved in policy work for the ANC and landed in the office of Minister Trevor Manuel as he became the first trade minister of the New Democracy in 1994. So one of the files that I started off with was the European Union. So it's a great pleasure for me to be back here talking about the European Union. I had, of course, to do a bit of reading and catching up before this lecture, because I had since then gone on to do a few other things. But I'll come back to that in the discussion. But let me start by saying thank you very much to Dr. Marcus Cornaro, the ambassador of the European Union. And he has set the bar very high by starting with, of course, our most esteemed Nelson Mandela in your opening remarks. And so I thought perhaps I should start there too, so that I don't, drop the conversation to a lower level. Let me say that one of the first things I read as I started on my journey in trade diplomacy was Nelson Mandela's famous article that he wrote in the journal Foreign Affairs in 1993, just as the ANC was coming in to the government. He wrote, I think, a seminal article setting out South Africa's vision and foreign policy, and which has held me in good stead, and certainly still is my reference point as I have traversed the world working for South Africa. And he said in his article that South Africa's foreign policy shall be based on human rights. It was the beginning and the end of his foreign policy, and the rest are details. But that was his vision and the guidance that he gave all of us who then worked for the new government. Since then, I've had to do some learning about how to negotiate in the narrow areas that I was involved in. And of course, on hindsight, I reflected on what was South Africa's approach, what was my approach to trade negotiations. And I did write an article on this subject as I reflected on this matter a few years ago, as I was approaching my retirement. And it's an article written in the journal Global Policy. And I think there are three lessons I draw, and which in my own experience did become my own approach as well in the course of my negotiating experience. And they come from Nelson Mandela. And you can find some of these ideas in a book written by Richard Stengel, which is called Mandela's Way, I think it's called. And the first was in Mandela's approach to negotiations. He always started with the basic principle, or the values as the EU paper on the new paper on trade starts off with, that EU trade policy should be based on values. And that's what Mandela's starting point was too. And he said whenever you started in a negotiation, you should always have some principles on which to base your views on and your perspectives on. But then after that, what Richard Stengel says, everything else after that was tactics and strategy for Mandela. How to pursue a course which achieved those principles, and he would use any approach which got him there. And so he was in the end a great pragmatist. Second, and this is a learning that I drew certainly in my early work from Mandela, and again you will find it in his first foreign policy article. It was about the way he saw our relationship with our neighbors in Africa. And his guidance was that South Africans should always ensure that they also supported and advanced the interests of Africa. And he said this, that we should not do this in a manner which was paternalistic, but because we are bigger, we are the bigger brother on the continent, but in a spirit of solidarity. And I hope in the course of my own work, and as I come back to some of the issues you raised, we will discuss this point. The third issue and the third approach that I learned from Mandela's teachings was his uncanny ability, unique capacity to keep in his head two opposing ideas, completely contradictory and opposing ideas, and be comfortable with both of them. And his teaching was that in any negotiation, especially in the very difficult ones that sometimes we find ourselves in, the ability of a negotiator to be comfortable with both ideas is the starting point for a solution. And so I thought about that many times in the course of my own work, especially as I served many years in Geneva, in the World Trade Organization, where we still have many outstanding issues, and I'll come back to that as well in the conversation. So that's my starting point, and it's where you started, and I think it's a very useful starting point for the conversation about how the EU and South Africa can address global challenges and how we can do this in a spirit of global partnership. As we started in our work in the world, it was clear to us that the central challenge facing the world at that time and today is that of poverty, world poverty. And it is for that reason, too, that in the year 2000, the Millennium Development Goals put poverty at its center, first and foremost. And it is interesting that South Africa played a very important role with the European Union in launching the Millennium Development Goals in the year 2000. And it is indeed, I think, a great success of that program, that it was able to achieve a 50% reduction in the poverty levels of people less than $1 a day, almost in record time, partly because of the tremendous changes that were taking place in the world from 2000 onwards, the rise of China and the emerging countries. But as we got closer to 2015, the end of the Millennium Development Goals, the world began to confront the challenges of climate change, environmental degradation, and in Rio +20 in 2012, we agreed on another set of goals, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We took both the Millennium Development Goals and the sustainable issues of sustainability, environmental degradation, climate change, and we put them together to create 17 new goals. And the first of those, again, was about poverty and how we address, the issue of absolute poverty, and some 1 billion people still live in poverty in the world. And interestingly, the 17th issue, which you raised today, is that of global partnership. How do we work together to deal with these challenges of the SDGs? And so let me come back to how South Africa and the European Union indeed have been working in the past to deal with global challenges in a creative and innovative way, and how we can take this relationship further. And I'll do this in the way I've come to work in my previous job, bilaterally, regionally, and multilaterally. So let's start with the bilateral. And as I said earlier, I was fortunate and perhaps challenged in my first few weeks in my job with Minister Trevor Manuel, because he gave me a big pile of letters from ministers around the world, all asking South Africa to begin to initiate dialogue on how to renew and rebuild a relationship with the world. And one of those came from Sir Leon Britton, who was then Commissioner of the European Union, and he said in his letter, I invite you, I, the European Commissioner, to begin a new and ambitious relationship with the European Union. And he put forward the concept of a free trade agreement between South Africa, a bilateral free trade agreement. And that's how my work started with the European negotiations. I was the lead negotiator for South Africa. In response, of course, we thought a bit about it. By the way, I got some advice from some of my European friends at Sussex University, like Professor Chris Stevens and others. And one of the, so my response to that as South Africa's negotiator was, well, this is an interesting proposal, but actually what we really want to do is we want to build stronger relationships with our neighbors in Africa. And so we preferred a Lome type arrangement, which at the time the rest of Africa had a trade relationship with the European Union as part of the Lome Convention. And of course the European Union didn't agree, for reasons which will become clearer as we talk about the way in which the European trajectory on the Lome Convention was moving. It was just about the same time when the European Union itself was going through a process of review of its relationships with Africa in the Lome Convention, and they then started a new relationship called the Cotonou Agreement, which had as its end point the creation of free trade agreements with the rest of Africa. And so it clearly was not, the EU was not going to draw us into the Lome Convention, which was by that stage obsolete in its own view, and it needed to make a change. So of course the EU insisted on free trade, bilateral free trade, and because we were able to focus on the principle and work in a pragmatic way, we said, yes, we'll have both. So let's have one foot in Lome and the other in the bilateral free trade agreement, which is what we did. But of course, we did make the EU go back to the Commission and the member states and come back with a new mandate, because the original mandate was too rigid, and it spoke of trade and not development. And so we urged the EU to ensure that this agreement was developmental, and we called it an asymmetrical agreement. It needed to be asymmetrical, both in timing and particularly in content. And I think we were able to achieve, to a considerable degree, something like that in the what became known as the Trade and Development Cooperation Agreement, the first trade agreement between South Africa and the European Union. I think the European Union did get a bit embarrassed and blushed, because in the first round, as the EU had to decide how many tariff lines they were going to protect, you know, we got to 46% of agriculture. So what it did tell us at the very outset that although Sir Leon put this a very ambitious concept on the table of free trade, his own member states were still living in a very protectionist era. Our sense of naivety was beginning to erode pretty fast. But that was the building block to a very interesting relationship. I think that the transition from the TDCA to what we now have, and the agreement that Minister Davies and the ambassador spoke about at the press conference on Friday, the conclusion of the SADC, so-called SADC EPA, which is an agreement which we now were able to enter into with our neighbors, particularly with the Customs Union, the Southern African Customs Union, and Mozambique and the European Union, addressed one of the flaws of the previous agreement, which was that the previous agreement was simply a bilateral agreement between South Africa and the EU. And this, of course, created challenges for us because we are part of a customs union. And that's been rectified now that we have a collective agreement between the customs union and the European Union. It also has addressed some of the old issues about agriculture. And it has opened up the market in the EU for a larger percentage of our agricultural products, for which, of course, we paid a small price through agreeing to a number of GIs. But, of course, that was a two-way street. But it did take a bit more time, like the Port and Uzo negotiation much earlier. But I think if you look at the body language and the way in which both Minister Davies and the ambassador spoke about the agreement, although it did take us some time, but I think there is a general sense of satisfaction on both sides and in the country as a whole that this is a mutually beneficial relationship. It's a win-win on both sides. It strengthens the relationship, and it is a testimony to the ability of two negotiating partners to negotiate very difficult issues and shake hands and agree and go forward. So in that spirit, let me say that some of the issues you did raise about some of the challenges in our bilateral relationship, which deal with issues of the investment climate, policy uncertainty, those are relatively minor. They're relatively minor. The relationship between South Africa and the European Union, the bilateral relationship, is one of the most profound trade relationships this country has with any other region in the world. It is profound not only because the EU is our largest trading partner, but also because the investment relationship between South Africa and the European Union is very deep. Over 77% of our investments come from the European Union, and increasingly bilateral investments, outward investments into the European Union. Our exports, although still primarily are made up of primary products, but increasingly the content is increasing value-added products. You'll see Ford being driven in the EU, made in South Africa, and increasingly a number of other agricultural other products. And by the way, agriculture, the kind of agriculture we export into the EU is high value added. And not many countries can get, have the level of sophistication our exporters have to get the product into the EU market at the high value end. So I think that the policy issues you've spoken about are easily dealt with. I'm pleased that you, on your side, you've created a business association, the EU Business Association. I have helped the Americans, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. You'll recall that just a year ago, we had a very long list of issues with the United States. And one of the things we promised them was we will deal with those in a pragmatic way. And we did. We got the Chamber of Commerce around the table. We dealt with each of the issues. It is true, there are a number of policy issues on the table in this country that have created some uncertainty, policy incoherence, and have created some disquiet amongst investors. But when you get the investors around the table and you get to discuss what black economic empowerment is about and how we can customize that to the particular concerns and interests of companies, we are able to find pragmatic approaches forward. So although I don't work in government anymore, I'm happy to facilitate, and I'm sure we can solve a number of these issues. Let me say a few things about the regional relationship. As you know, South Africa is now part of a very ambitious trade, a set of trade negotiations in Africa, starting, of course, with our own customs union, then with SADC, the Southern African Development Community, and then, of course, with COMESA, the Common Market of Eastern and Southern Africa. And this negotiation led to what we call the tripartite free trade agreement, which encompasses about 27 countries on the East Coast. But then, of course, last year, we also launched the CFTA, a massive negotiation, which will also include the western part of Africa into the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which brings together all 54 countries. Of course, it is a very ambitious negotiation, but we have, of course, drawn a lot of lessons from your experience in Europe. We have looked to you to see why and how you have embarked on the same road. Of course, you had a much earlier start than we did, way back in 1957 when you created the Treaty of Rome, created the EEC. In our case, our countries were beginning to decolonize as you started on your road to integration. We've had a number of challenges in Africa, but in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a political leadership, a great determination on the part of the continent to embark on this path. And one of the challenges that will arise as we go forward is how we square the circle between the European free trade agreements, which it has embarked upon now with each region of the continent, and the integration process of the continent itself. And how do we try to ensure that these two do not conflict with each other and undermine each other? And I know, for example, there is a lot of anxiety in Southern Africa, because Southern Africa now has 4 different arrangements with Europe, 4 different types of economic partnership agreements with the European Union. And how we unravel that and how we ensure that the European project of integrating with Europe, with Africa, doesn't undermine Africa's own integration. I think that will be one of the challenges going forward. But again, working together in partnership, we can address this. South Africa's approach to regional integration is what we call development integration. Development integration because we think that simply opening our market to our neighbors will not automatically create the necessary balanced trading relationship, because many of these countries in our neighborhood are at the very early stages of industrialization. They simply don't have the capacity. We can open the market, but they won't be able to export. So what we have thought about many years ago and built into our negotiating approach is a concern for building of capacity, productive capacity in manufacturing, in agriculture, and increasingly in services, and how we can assist these countries to build the necessary productive capacity through extending regional value chains, regional productive value chains across the continent, assisting other countries to also participate in the industrialization of the continent, and thus giving them the capacity to export to South Africa. And in this task, we would look to you to see how we can work together, sharing your experience and technology and resources. Here too, the other leg of development integration is about infrastructure development, particularly cross-border infrastructure. And the EU has been ahead of other multilateral institutions in supporting regional infrastructure projects. South Africa, of course, has been hard at work, and we have our own experience in how this can be done, our whole own technology built right here in the Maputo Development Corridor. You know, a good example of how we can work together across borders to build infrastructure, road, rail, port development that can grow the economies of the region in a cooperative way. And here too, as we embark upon these kinds of projects across the continent, there is a huge role for the European Union. And I did also look at the commitments you did make at the Financing for Development conference held quite recently in Addis Ababa last year. And I was very pleased to see that you have taken a number of bold steps forward. One of which is, and again I was pleased to see this because I hadn't seen the numbers over the last few years, that the numbers on ODA have increased because it had been on a declining curve for the last decade or so. But over the last 2 years or so, the EU member states, particularly the UK, interestingly, has moved up, not just committed, but moved up its ODA to 0.7%, which I thought was an amazing shift in its policy and commitment. But also a number of other member states of the EU, Denmark, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, are actually achieving that target of 0.7% of their GNPs and are committed to maintain that up to 2030. So I think a great congratulations must go to the EU for your commitment. And it is that sort of commitment that we can work with to address some of the challenges in Africa on infrastructure development. Finally, let me say something about the multilateral. I was fortunate as we embarked on our work in the multilateral world to have been part of the host nation for UNCTAD 9 in 1996, at a time when they were depleting resources and political will to support a premier development UN development institution like the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. South Africa hosted it. And interestingly, the first time, I think, the concept of partnership for development became part of the UN lexicon was in Midrand, 1996. This conference was hosted by South Africa. Minister Alec Irwin was then Minister of Trade and Industry, hosted this, and it was one of the most successful conferences of UNCTAD at the time, given the challenges it faced at the time. And I think that spirit of partnership has permeated, the language of UN conferences after that, and the SDGs, the FFD I've just talked about, and indeed your own trade policy, the most recent trade policy of the EU, Trade for All, has incorporated the concept of partnership. Partnership, of course, for South Africa goes to the very heart of our own democracy. Our commitment to the multilateralism comes from our own history of being part of a global anti-apartheid movement, a global movement for the eradication of apartheid. And yours, of course, your commitment to multilateralism comes from your own history in your part of the world of conflict. The First World War, the Second World War, when leaders said, never again. And that was when the United Nations was born. It was a way of trying to ensure that conflict would be something of the past, and we would build the new world on the basis of rules and values. And it is a commitment we both share, and it's for this reason that South Africa took a leading role in the launch of the Doha Round. The Doha Round, which was then called the Doha Development Round, and we then, together with the EU, we launched the round, and we gave it its name, the Doha Development Agenda, South Africa and the European Union, at a time when many countries did not want to launch this round. And as we reflect now on the crisis in the WTO and the collapse of the round, it would seem to me that it is time for both of us to do what you say in your Trade for All policy paper, find ways in which we can revitalize the WTO, because it is in a difficult place. In our view, it's not going on, in the right direction. We need to go back to the principles on which we built the Doha Round, given that the situation has changed, there are new conditions in the world. But how do we ensure that we don't create two different worlds? How do we ensure that we don't go back to the world in which we had a competitive liberalization and competition and conflict in trade? And the only way forward, it would seem to me, is go back to Nelson Mandela's words at the 50th anniversary of the WTO, where he said that South Africa is committed to multilateralism and to a rules-based system, but the rules must be just. And he said, if the rules are not just, they will not be followed. And therefore, if we want the world to support a rules-based system, they should be fair, they should be balanced, and they should be just. So let's work together on those values. Thank you very much.
Dr. Ismail, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for giving us some of the insights and the background to South Africa's starting point in international relations, international trade relations, and for taking us on some of the important milestones of the journey as you had experienced them. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be mindful about time as we get into the next session. We did start about 10 minutes late, and given that you all had planned to be here for a particular amount of time, it means we'd roughly expect you to stay for about 10 minutes more. So with that in mind, you've had the input from Dr. Cornaro, the ambassador. You've had a very detailed response from Dr. Ismail on various issues, trying to frame the current scenario as it was presented to us by the ambassador. So I would like you to, let's get a few pointed questions. I know the ambassador probably wants to respond to Dr. Ismail at this point, because I think some of the issues does beg a response. But I think let's allow to take us one or two questions, and we'll allow you then, Ambassador, to give a response. So let me pick a few hands. Everybody's sitting so cold. Yes, I wish I could have lit a fire in this here. But anyhow, we'll take one or two questions, and then we'll allow the Ambassador to respond. So I see there was, do I have a question here that's one, and is there any other, and then that's two, and this will be the third one. We'll take three questions. Okay, so let's start off down here with the red. Yes.
Thank you for the time and the discussion. I was most interested to ask question to Dr. Marcus about the view of EU on Africa and South Africa concerning economic independence, not only independence, because South Africa will still be trading with EU on many issues. But given that South Africa as a country wants to diversify its relationship with other countries, such as India, China, and Brazil, in terms of economic development, to extend its freedom on and expand also its economy. Will the EU be happy in supporting such kind of development? And will EU be happy with that extension? Because we do hear in journals, they say that if Africa expand to China, EU citizens will not have jobs. So will EU be happy for Africa and South Africa extend its relationship with other countries such as China, and will they support such kind of move? That's what I want to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. The second question was just the row up there, yes?
Yeah, thanks, Doc. Dr. Marcus, I just want to get the EU perspective. In your opening statements, you said that global partnerships should not be mutually exclusive. By that, do you mean that a friend of your friend should be my friend? Two, you also mentioned about the EU's cooperation on programs on education, particularly higher education now in our context. What's the EU perspective on the movement, the revolution, so to speak, on the South African student community on free education in trying to access education? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. You snuck two questions into one. And down here, yes.
Thank you. Good evening. It's not two from me. It's a double-barrel question.
Go for it.
In all that has been said by the two eminent members, I'd like to pose a question around Brexit. And it's a very tempting question. It's in everybody's lips right now. And ask, to what extent, if this is implemented, might it derail or dismantle all these wonderful other agreements that you've referred to here? And the second part of that question is, crystal ball gaze for us, to what extent might you think China might be drooling on the fringes maybe for Brexit to actually take place, and therefore that this would be opportunistic for China to, cement its position in relation to South Africa and Africa in particular? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to allow the Ambassador to respond. Okay, I had a few points, but perhaps let me park those as well. You can use
Thanks a lot for, first of all, Dr. Ismail, for a very good discourse on Europe, of which I'm happy to pick up just two or three points, but maybe first to come back to the audience on the various questions. Now, the first, I think, allows me to amplify a point I tried to make more in passing, and that this, the complementarity, and I'm very sincere about that, the complementarity we do see between the type of South Africa-Europe relations and the type of relations South Africa would logically develop with China, India, or say BRIC, and other emerging countries. We, as Europe, we cannot ask for more multilateral-based trade. So if we see South Africa trading a lot with China, with India, Brazil, with Mexico, and others, that is overall very good news for the type of global economic viewpoint we do have. Of course, provided all of that is nicely embedded in the rules-based WTO order. And then if you look at the detail, we also see that currently whatever South Africa managed to develop with China is massively based on raw materials being exported and finished products being re-imported, and very much at the mercy of the world economy. Inversely, the type of trade relations we meanwhile have between South Africa and Europe are far more robust in the sense that, in fact, about half of that is non-raw material or primary products based, but half of that is already in the manufacturing and the agro-processing domain, and it ranges from canned fruit and finished upmarket wines to car parts and solar panels. Inversely also, Europe not importing here finished products which go into the shopping malls, but very much machinery and all products which help South Africa to continue its own manufacturing. So all of that is complementary to the type of trade relations we do have with China, and this is something also we envision will be reinforced in the current economic partnership agreement. But your point is critical, because when I came, I felt that there was a beauty contest somehow, and it was sort of the BRICS all over the place, and the Chinese all over the place, or the Indians, and Europe was either taken for granted or forgotten. And it is true that one of the messages we had to pass back to our interlocutors is, I mean, A, not to take Europe for granted, but B, this is entirely complementary. So why not actually work on both fronts at the same time? Secondly, I think your question also picked up whether or not the global partnerships are mutually exclusive or not. We firmly believe that they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, we live off our DNA is made up of strengthening rules-based multilateral systems with strong roles, notably of medium powers, medium regions, cooperating, building bridges rather than being antagonists. You also asked my view on free education. What I did observe since I came is that the robustness of democratic debate is also measured very much again about very lively student politics, and one can certainly sympathize with the fact that the way the fees have gone up in a context of difficulty of both financing and also of difficulty of a guaranteed job placement, that this just cried out for some counter-reaction by students. I leave it to you to judge to what extent, meanwhile, the student movement has been instrumentalized for broader political discussions. I would also make the argument that free education per se is not possible. It certainly would have to come at the expense of something, and somewhere also bankrolling the bill. This is something we do struggle with in Europe. Those observing how we redesign university will also realize that this is yet an open discussion. It's part of the social contract you were referring to earlier, to see whether or not, notably tertiary education, is something which should be bankrolled flatly out by all taxpayers, or whether it should be borne more predominantly by those who would more immediately benefit from education. I mean, I personally would certainly argue that the value of education per se is something which goes well beyond the benefit of the individual. Hence, the more the state, essentially taxpayers and citizens, can contribute to that, I think the better it is towards building a just and equitable society than just having individuals or individual families or groups taking the brunt. But again, there is no easy mathematic solution to that, and quality education, and notably catching up like you have to do in South Africa on decades of missed opportunities to educate the population at large does come at a high cost, where one would have to see how this is being distributed. But I must say it makes up for a fascinating debate, and it also, I think, brings South Africa closer to those who observe it with benevolence and with interest, because I think it's just a healthy sign of maturing society and country. Now, on you asked about Brexit, but I think we're talking about Britain, which is also up for discussion now in a few days. So one of the the catchwords is that from our side, commenting this from Europe, we still find this is a debate on the future place of Britain in Europe, and there's around 2 or 3 additional deals struck between Cameron and the remaining 27 heads of state and government and the Commission on how to accommodate some of the more difficult points Britain would have had with the European Union project. You would also have seen a lot of that had to do with how to cater for social transfers with newly arrived Europeans who would benefit from the freedom of movement. Another point was also that Britain wanted to clearly say that this would not have to lead to a necessarily ever-ending closer union, but to leave that more open. Anyway, this is up for a very tense sort of a referendum after very tense discussion. I mean, I will not sort of comment now on predictions, other than referring to the many good quotes you would see from Tusk and Juncker and others, who of course would, and a lot of the UK leadership, who would still hope that the population would be sufficiently convinced to remain in the current configuration under the new arrangements. Now, whether, and I would also refer you, I think, to very good comments your trade minister gave. I was present when he was asked this in the context of EPA. And one of the media quoted also that, and then he rightly said that as far as legal arrangements on trade were concerned, like many others, and we discussed this at the beginning, all of the current arrangements, including one like EPA or the previous TCDA, Dr. Faizel was referring to, they have all been ratified also individually by each and every member state. Hence, all of the legal acquis of the European Union has been passed into domestic UK law via ratification or others. So that would also remain part of the legal body politics. Any arrangement to leave the European Union would leave with them. You may have heard that the system would foresee about a two-year period to disentangle the one or the other aspect. And from a strictly conceptual point of view, I echo what Rob Davis also said, is that it's not too difficult to imagine that the current European Free Trade Area with Norway, Switzerland and a few others would be a logical receptacle for or a landing zone should indeed the British electorate decide that they would like to leave. More difficult, certainly, is would be the knock-on effect of public debate in Europe in circumstances which are certainly not easy. But the European Union, being so heavily law-based and rules-based, from that perspective, and notably on the trade side, which was evoked, it is not that you would have an instant game changer. For anyone involved in trade, for anyone involved in business, or in anyone involved here in South Africa. So this, as far as Brexit or Britain is concerned. Anyway, we'll see Thursday, Friday morning, and there will be also a European Union Council a few days after the vote, so that we can be assured that European leadership in general can take stock of the events.
Thank you very much for those responses. Okay, I want to test your appetite to probe these matters further. So are there more hands in the audience? So that's one. Okay. Whilst we're waiting for that, and that will be the last question from the audience, perhaps I should just also raise with you, Ambassador, in speaking of foreign direct investment, you spoke of trust in policy making, and perhaps maybe you could just expand on that a little bit further. And then from a research and development perspective, one of the issues we often observe is in foreign direct investment situations, very often the research and development element of industries or people investing here do not really come here. In other words, we may invest, but South Africa, I think, and speaking also from a research perspective, would also value us investment in a way in which laboratories, research and development also gets rooted here, so that we could stimulate the local economy with newer things. So some of the IP emanating out of here in collaboration with EU partners. And so I'm wondering, to what extent does that happen, and how could we entrench that further in foreign direct investment situations? So together with that, we have the last question from the floor.
Thank you, Prof. I have two questions that can actually be answered by both of our guests. And it's very unfortunate that we don't actually have a Chinese ambassador, particularly to the first question, because that is quite relevant to them as well. My first question to you, Dr. Cornaro, is will Europe leave Africa to be self-determining instead of the current paternal relationship that we have? And similarly, supportive that to you, Dr. Ismail, when you talk about value-added products export to Europe, how much value is left for Africans in those products, as we still do not own the means of production? And when I say about Africa, I'm talking about the rest of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Kulani. Okay. I see a hand. Okay. All right.
It's a public lecture.
Pardon?
I was saying it's a public lecture.
Yes, I'm very much aware of it. I had just ruled that was the last question, but seeing that you're on your feet would allow you that last question.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to ask this question. I'm not sure of the year, but it should be 2005. The multi-fiber agreement, and I'm pushing this question to the former ambassador who was representing us at EU and also at WTO. The multi-fiber agreement, which South Africa signed, immediately when it kicked in, you started seeing cheap imports coming into the country. Talk about leather, fabrics, fiber. And when they came into the country, industries which were very powerful here in the Western Cape, one by one, started dying after that agreement was signed. And I want to pose this question and to say the effect of that agreement, not only that one, and all the other agreements which are still being signed, the effects of that to our economy, and moving forward, and as many agreements which will still be signed. I will stop it there.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start perhaps by allowing Dr. Ismail to respond, because there were some questions that were directed to him, and then we'd move on to Ambassador Cornaro.
Well, thank you very much. On the issue about Africa and value added, well, you know, this is one of the key issues facing the continent, how to increase the value of its products, how to add value, both to its minerals, its agricultural products, and its services. And here, I think, you know, we have a great opportunity to work together. So, you know, we have a few issues with the EU on some standards in the EU, but we do have a significant export capacity, and we have been able to access the EU market for agricultural products which fetch a very high value. And as I was saying earlier, you know, a basic agricultural product like citrus or avocados, you know, or mangoes, there's quite a lot of value added. Much of this has to do with services. You're talking about technological, you know, skills and that go into the science that is required to ensure that the standards are met. This capacity doesn't exist for most of the continent. And this is the kind of capacity we can help other African countries to develop, because they have the same agricultural endowments, they have the land, they have the climate, and have the people, but they don't have the technological capacity and to improve the value added. On the question of what happened, you know, in the early 90s, as the Uruguay round agreements. So what happened was, in the last round, which ended in 1994, and as we came into government in 1994, we concluded the last round. The WTO concluded, the GATT before it concluded the last round. And what that meant was countries agreed to reduce their tariffs, including South Africa, which was then classified as a developed country in the GATT. And so it took on quite onerous commitments to reduce its tariffs across the board, like other countries. Of course, in addition to this, what we know now, looking back at that period of history, the late 1990s and early part of the millennium, is the rapid rise of the emerging economies, particularly China. You know, by 2000, China already had 2 decades of growth, consistent growth, which drew investors from around the world, the United States, Europe, turning China from, you know, a relatively backward industrial economy, or agricultural economy rather, into the factory of the world. So, you know, this happened in the low value-added, labor-intensive products, textiles and clothing, agriculture, you know, electronic products like black and white television screens, leather and footwear. And so we felt that, yeah, in South Africa. I know because I come from Pietermaritzburg, which has got leather and footwear plants all over, and I saw them myself, you know, as those plants closed down and people, you know, jobs, lost their jobs. And that happened here too in the Western Cape and many parts of the country. So as China grew in its productive capacity and its exports around the world, there were many countries like South Africa, many on the continent and even in Latin America, who suffered from the consequences of China's success. So there were a combination of factors that resulted in the, the unemployment that was created in this country as a consequence of imports. And clearly trade liberalization was one of those additional factors. And the issue for us is how to manage that, and in future the lessons are, trade liberalization has its value, but at the same time you've got to manage it, and you've got to make sure that it doesn't destroy jobs, but you manage it in a way which creates the necessary adjustment and the reforms and helps to make your industry more competitive in the world.
Thank you. Ambassador?
Thanks a lot. I will maybe combine your question, and thanks for getting back to that. It was a bit of an omission that I didn't comment on interdependence between Europe and South Africa, by also picking up Dr. Faizel's question whether the current economic partnership agreements help the continent work towards a continental free trade area, or whether they're a stumbling block. We would argue that they're building blocks towards that vision, and a vision which goes to 2063. If you were to read Dr. Dlamini Zuma's vision as to by when this could be achieved. So again, as far as the European Union as an institution is concerned, and as sort of from a conceptual development and trade economic point of view, would see the current regional EPA agreements as helping the African continent towards compatibility between the various agreements. And I think already how Mozambique is integrated into SACU, Angola as an observer, and how that pans out with the similar agreement with COMESA, I think are cases in point to prove that. On as far as we're concerned, you ask also about whether this is still a sort of paternalistic arrangement, and whether we have sort of changed tack. I mean, I would firmly argue that for the European Union, certainly yes. And the reference points to that would be any of the language you would see in recent meetings between EU and South Africa, but also EU and Africa as a continent. And I think the most pertinent of that was the 2014 meeting, where in Brussels we had invited all some sort of 60-some African heads of state for a major review. And a lot of that is not only language phrased in partnership, prosperity, and people, but if you look at the various policy commitments and the underlying economic dimension faced in Europe, namely the combined quest for new solutions for economic growth, which very strongly are linked to also better and new solutions for economic growth within Africa, very, very clearly. And as far as South Africa is concerned, the continued interest in the transformation of the country and realizing sort of the constitutional ambitions, you would not find, seen from the outside, from the international perspective, I think a more adamant and more committed supporter on a lot of that, which is also linked to the question of trust in policy making, even sort of indirectly. Where we have a chagrin is the increasing unpredictability of some of the policy measures which do affect foreign direct investment, or more general presence of foreigners in South Africa. And this is both around the black empowerment rules, it's also around the investment bills, it's the expropriation bill, and a few others which are currently at the fore. And again, on none of that Europe would have a particular issue, certainly not on the black empowerment agenda. Certainly also not on an investment framework which would give privilege to inward investment and South African investments being sheltered. Where there is an issue is that these things have become rather unpredictable and short-lived. and which makes any medium-term investment very, very difficult, and which also explains why in the current setup, a lot of the international European companies remain and stay engaged, but you don't find many new companies coming in. And if you were to make an argument on where some of the job creation opportunities would have to come, yes, a lot with that education, a lot of what with the skills development, but also a lot still with foreign-led investment in linking that to innovation. By the way, I meet quite regularly with the Chinese ambassador, so we have sort of our periodic 3 months luncheon. He meets with, I come with my team, or 2-3 people, he comes with his. And there's quite a few things we can openly share. And even if you look at the FOCAC arrangement and the broader Chinese vision on Africa, it's not so diametrically opposed as to what we're doing. The big difference currently is that we don't have the type of financing available the Chinese use to bankroll major investments, nor do we have the habit to link financing with exclusive sourcing from Europe. And this explains why I think on a lot of the investment needs, they have a strong leverage. But as I say, the way, as long as the investments are properly planned and properly priced, this is certainly to the benefit also of African growth potential, and hence also a broader growth potential. So that's less of a contentious issue. You mentioned the issue of innovation and research and development. There's no magic wand either, and certainly no prescription we can give on individual company decisions as to how much they plow back into research and development. But I can say that at least the part funded by the European Union under the new Horizon 2020 program, but also the way the new Erasmus Plus has emerged from Erasmus Mundus, has a much stronger investment component and capacity building component alongside the mobility aspect. So as part of a general narrative, I would also like to argue that the current setup of EU funding modalities, notably to Horizon 2020, should help you also mitigate some of that aspect. But otherwise, if you look at the tremendous capacity of South African academic potential and interest in innovation and research, I would argue also that the more you would have international actors being comfortable with the environment in which they can operate, the more also that would open up additional channels for research and development. I'm not sure if I managed to hit sort of all the chords of what was asked. If not, please get back to me. Otherwise, I think I would leave it at that at the moment. Thank you.
No, certainly. I think I've put a tick against most of the issues that were raised, and I think certainly some of the. No, I think all of them have been raised, and certainly I think just to agree with you, our own assessment, and therefore, as you've mentioned, CPUT has quite a high rate of participation in Erasmus Plus, and I think we've noted that the new formula does tend to the new programs are very forward-looking in favouring entrepreneurship and helping to foster innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've now stayed over the time of the program, and I'm very aware of that. It's quite cold, and so to draw the evening to a close, I think I'd like to ask each of you, and I'm going to be like the news on TV. They say we got 60 minutes. We got to cut to the market. So 60 seconds. So I'm going to allow each of you 60 seconds to, in 60 seconds, say something about the way forward regarding South Africa, international relations, and partnerships, and what do we need to do in 60 seconds. And so, Dr. Ismail first.
Thank you very much. Well, I think, I'm very happy that Ambassador Marcus Cornaro started from Nelson Mandela and the great inspiration he provided to South Africa and its relationship with the world. And so partnership is built into the DNA of South African foreign policy. And from what I hear and all I've learned from the EU, you also have a great commitment to multilateralism. I think together we can work in Africa, which is a common concern and focus. And as we embark on our regional integration process in Africa, drawing from your own experience, but your commitment to work in Africa, we have an enormous amount of work to do. And working together, I think we can both add greater value to the integration process and the particular development integration approach that South Africa has. So I look forward to working with you on it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ismail. Closing remarks from you?
Not only difficult, but impossible to beat as a 60 seconds. But 3 points, maybe on 20 seconds each. The one is to pick up again the unity in diversity, which is so enormously enriching here in South Africa. But I repeat, this is very much also the kit which we need to take the European Union integration process forward. And where we fail to do so and to give credit to the diversity within the unity, we unravel and get problems. The second aspect, and maybe looking at Cape Times, if there's one quote I would like to maybe be seen being picked up, is indeed on our firm commitment around employability and Europe as South Africa's most reliable, predictable international partner if it comes to give support on anything to do with skills for development, the role of that within education, and role also of European foreign direct investment can play in bringing job opportunities to bear. I think this is what the European Union sort of current main agenda would be for South Africa. And the third is just to say, well, Europe and Africa, two neighboring continents requiring each other, and there's nothing we can meaningful do as Europe in Africa if it's not through a strong partnership with South Africa.
Thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, my task then for the evening is done, and I'd like to call upon Mr. Norman Jacobs, CPUT's Director of Marketing and Communication, to draw the evening to a close and to acknowledge the necessary parties.
Thank you, Sean. Colleagues, I'm not going to keep you long. I know I'm the last hurdle between you and some warm coffee and tea outside there. And let me just say, I checked with the person in charge of this facility. The aircon is not on. It's been off the whole evening. So I don't know what happened here tonight, but it was very cold. And thank you for bearing with us, until the end of the program. I'm going to ask our host just to come to the podium, please. Chris, come up, please. And if you can just hand over 2 gifts to our speakers. But before you do that, Chris, just to thank you, Chris, for organizing Ambassador Cornaro to come here tonight. We have had him scheduled for the prestigious lecture series, but we thought that it would be best to have him here at the public lecture. So thank you, Chris, for organizing that. And I'm going to ask you now just to hand over these 2 gifts as a token of our appreciation to our 2 excellent speakers. Next time we make sure we have more females on the stage. It's not a good sign.
Here we go. Smiles together. Yes, here we go. Hold up like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I just ask you to put your hands together, please? A round of applause for our two speakers. Thank you very much for coming, gentlemen. We appreciate it highly, and thank you for being with us tonight. Aziz, thank you for coming again this evening. Thank you for your support. We value the partnership that we have with the Cape Times. It's not just about the public lecture series. You're giving lots of employment opportunities to our students in journalism and some of our other students in the business faculty, etc., etc. And we've got other wonderful, deals with the Cape Times, so thank you very much for that. And I look forward to our next public lecture series that will take place in around about August. That's after the election. The proceedings here tonight was streamed live, again, all over the world. To Derek Stocken and his team, thank you very much for the sound and for doing the live streaming for us tonight. Then the people who all work behind the scenes, the people in MCD and other departments, thank you for making this second public lecture series, again, the success that it was. And then to Sean Pather. You've been an excellent program director, Sean, not just tonight, but also the first public lecture we've had here about 2 months ago. And I must say, colleagues, Sean will be leaving us at the end of this week. He's joining our partners just over the road. Sean, thank you very much for helping me in particular to manage these public lectures. You've been a great help and a pillar of support. Thank you, and all of the best for you next door. And then, last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, you, the audience. Without you, we don't have a public lecture, as my colleague over there said. It is a public lecture. So thank you very much to all of you for having braved the cold Cape Town weather to be here tonight. We expected well over 100 people, but thank you to you for coming. And as a reward for you being here, there's some light refreshments outside. Professor Ballard, I'm sorry, you did ask me if there's some wine. Next time around, maybe we'll have some wine here. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely evening. Oh, yes, sorry, before you go, yes, a gentleman saying, I'm Ken, I'm looking for a lift to Nyanga or near the CTIA, please. That's the one. So if you can give Ken a lift, please just indicate, and Ken can maybe find you. And then I'm asking the speakers to please remain on the stage for the media. That is a request from our media liaison person, Lauren Kenzie. So if the speakers can please just remain on the stage for a moment. Thank you very much.